Marcus Sullivan froze mid-step, his weathered hand gripping the rusted doorframe as 400 pounds of American black bear methodically worked the combination on his father's safe. The metallic clicks echoed through the abandoned gas station like gunshots in a cathedral. This wasn't possible. Bears didn't understand locks, didn't solve puzzles with surgical precision, didn't pause to look back at their human companion with eyes that held impossible intelligence. The coffee mug slipped from Marcus's trembling fingers, shattering against the concrete floor. Kodiak's massive head turned at the sound, those dark eyes meeting his with something that looked disturbingly like concern, maybe even pity. 6 months ago, Marcus had been a broken veteran, drowning his PTSD in whiskey bottles, inheriting nothing but a worthless gas station and a dangerous animal his dead father had left him. Now he watched his 4-year-old bear companion manipulate the final tumbler with a claw that moved like a surgeon's scalpel. "Jesus Christ, Kodiak," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. "What did Dad teach you?" The safe door swung open with a satisfied whisper, revealing stacks of documents, encrypted drives, and something that made Marcus's blood run cold, $200 million in bearer bonds. But it was the handwritten note on top that stopped his heart. "The boy knows more than you think. Trust him with your life. You'll need to." What had his father been hiding, and why did a bear hold the key to a fortune that could get them both killed? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Northern California redwoods stood like ancient sentinels around Sullivan's last stop, their towering shadows keeping the crumbling gas station in perpetual twilight. Highway 101 stretched endlessly in both directions, carrying tourists and truckers past the forgotten relic without a second glance. For Marcus Sullivan, this isolation had become both sanctuary and prison. 6 months earlier, he'd arrived here with nothing but a duffel bag, a Purple Heart he'd never wanted, and enough survivor's guilt to fill the Pacific Ocean. The inheritance reading in San Francisco had been a masterclass in humiliation. His siblings Bradford and Victoria inheriting millions while he got stuck with a broken-down gas station and what the lawyer had called that dangerous animal situation. Marcus had expected to find some mangy dog or maybe a hostile raccoon. Instead, he'd discovered Kodiak. The bear had been waiting for him that first day, sitting calmly beside the single functioning gas pump like he owned the place. 400 pounds of sleek black fur and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to look straight through to Marcus's soul. No aggression, no fear, just patient observation, as if Kodiak had been expecting him. The locals in nearby Ferndale had plenty to say about Colonel William Sullivan's pet project. Stories varied wildly. Some claimed the old military man had rescued an orphaned cub. Others whispered about government experiments and classified programs. What everyone agreed on was that the bear was unnaturally smart and had never shown aggression toward humans. Marcus's father had died suddenly of a heart attack 3 weeks before Marcus's discharge from the Army. They'd barely spoken in the 5 years since Marcus enlisted, the colonel disapproving of his youngest son's lack of direction and emotional instability. The old man had built his life around duty, honor, and service to country. Marcus had built his around trying to forget the IED blast that had killed his best friend Ryan and left him with shattered nerves and nightmares that whiskey couldn't quite drown. Living above the gas station in the small apartment, Marcus had initially planned to sell the property and use whatever money he could get to disappear somewhere warm and anonymous. But Kodiak had changed everything. The bear seemed to sense Marcus's PTSD episodes before they happened, positioning himself as a living, breathing anchor during the worst moments. When the nightmares came, Marcus would wake to find 400 pounds of warm fur pressed against his back, steady breathing that slowed his racing heart. The gas station barely functioned. One pump worked sporadically. The convenience store was mostly empty shelves, and the attached garage housed more rust than tools. But it was theirs. Marcus had stopped drinking entirely after the third week, partly because running out of money forced the decision, but mostly because Kodiak's disappointed looks were more effective than any rehab program. Now, staring at the impossible contents of his father's safe, Marcus realized he'd understood nothing about the man who'd raised him, the place he'd inherited, or the remarkable animal who'd become his closest friend. The real mystery was just beginning. The inheritance reading had been Marcus's first contact with his siblings in 3 years, and it went exactly as he'd expected. Badly. Bradford Sullivan, impeccably dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly disability check, had barely looked up from his phone. Victoria Sullivan Hayes, elegant in cream silk and dripping with understated jewelry, had offered him a pitying smile that made his skin crawl. The law offices of Davies Morrison Associates occupied an entire floor of a San Francisco high-rise, all polished mahogany and intimidating leather-bound volumes. Marcus had felt like a vagrant in his clean but worn khakis and the only button-down shirt he owned. The contrast was deliberate. His siblings wanted him to feel small, inferior, grateful for whatever scraps they might throw his way. "To my son Bradford," the elderly lawyer had read in a monotone voice, "I leave my stock portfolio valued at $15 million and the controlling interest in Sullivan Defense Consulting." Brad had nodded as if this were his natural due, fingers already dancing across his phone screen, probably calculating profit margins. "To my daughter Victoria, I leave my properties in Pacific Heights and Napa Valley, along with my art collection. Total value approximately $12 million. Tori had smiled that perfect smile she'd been perfecting since childhood, the one that never quite reached her eyes. Marcus had been bracing himself for the humiliation of being left out entirely when the lawyer continued, "To my son Marcus, I leave the entirety of the property located in Ferndale, California, including the business and all its contents. Furthermore, the animal currently residing on said property is to remain under Marcus's sole care and protection." The silence that followed was deafening. Brad had finally looked up from his phone, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then barely contained rage. "That's it? A gas station in the middle of nowhere and a dangerous wild animal?" "The property isn't worth $50,000, Tori had added, her voice carefully modulated but her eyes sharp as surgical steel. "And keeping a bear is illegal in California. Marcus, you could face serious criminal charges." But Marcus had barely heard them. His father's words echoed in his mind. Sole care and protection. Not ownership, not burden, but protection. As if Kodiak needed guarding from something. The drive back north had taken 6 hours, giving Marcus plenty of time to process his siblings' parting shots. Brad had cornered him in the parking garage, his perfectly styled facade finally cracking. "You think this is some kind of victory? Dad left you a liability, Marcus. That animal will be the death of you, just like your drinking, just like your pathetic inability to adjust to civilian life." Tori had been more subtle but equally vicious. "We're willing to buy you out, Marcus. 50,000 cash, enough to get you the help you clearly need. Think about it. You could check yourself into a proper facility, get clean, start over somewhere safe." Neither of them had asked about his sobriety. Neither had acknowledged that he'd been clean for 3 months. To them, he would always be the broken little brother who'd come home from war damaged and dangerous. The real surprise had come when he'd returned to the gas station that evening. He'd been sitting on the apartment's small porch, nursing a cup of coffee and watching Kodiak methodically patrol the property's perimeter, when he'd noticed something odd. The bear wasn't randomly wandering. He was following a specific pattern, stopping at certain spots, sniffing the ground with unusual intensity. Curiosity had gotten the better of him. Marcus had followed Kodiak to the back corner of the convenience store, where the bear had stopped and begun pawing at what looked like ordinary linoleum flooring, But when Marcus had knelt down to examine the spot more closely, he'd realized one tile was slightly different from the others, newer, less faded, with edges that didn't quite align perfectly. It had taken him 20 minutes with a crowbar to pry up the tile, and what he'd found underneath had changed everything. A small metal compartment, expertly concealed and containing items that made no sense for a simple gas station owner to possess. His father's encrypted military journal, a brass key unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, and a photograph of his mother he'd never known existed. The photo had hit him like a physical blow. His mother, Sarah, had died when he was 7, and his father had removed every trace of her from their lives afterward. But here she was, young and radiant, holding a baby that must have been Marcus himself. On the back, in his father's precise handwriting, "For my boys, both the one who walks on 2 legs and the one who walks on 4. Some bonds transcend species. Some love transcends understanding." The journal had been more cryptic. Pages and pages of coded entries, military abbreviations, and what looked like financial transactions. Marcus's cryptography training from the Rangers was rusty, but he'd recognized the pattern. This was high-level, classified material, the kind that could get people killed for possessing it. But it was the brass key that had truly puzzled him. Complex geometric patterns covered its surface, and its weight suggested some kind of specialized alloy. It looked less like a traditional key and more like a piece of precision machinery designed for a purpose Marcus couldn't fathom. The phone call had come at 3 in the morning, 2 days after he'd found the hidden compartment. The voice on the other end was professional, clipped, and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. "Marcus Sullivan, this is Agent Sarah Chen, Defense Intelligence Agency. I worked with your father for 15 years. We need to talk, and we need to talk now. Your life may depend on it." She'd hung up before he could respond, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in the dark. Beside him, Kodiak had raised his massive head, alert and watchful, as if he'd been expecting this call all along. That's when Marcus had realized the truth that would change everything. Kodiak wasn't just unusually intelligent. He'd been waiting. For Marcus, for this moment, for whatever came next. His father hadn't left him a burden or even a companion. He'd left him a partner. Agent Sarah Chen arrived at dawn in an unmarked sedan, her appearance as unremarkable as her voice had been professional. Mid-40s, average height, with the kind of forgettable face that probably served her well in intelligence work. But her eyes were sharp, constantly scanning, and Marcus noticed she kept her right hand near her jacket pocket as she approached the gas station. Kodiak had positioned himself between the approaching car and Marcus, not aggressively, but with the alert stance of a sentry. When Chen stepped out of the vehicle, the bear's massive head tilted slightly, and Marcus could have sworn he saw recognition flash in those dark eyes. "Hello, Kodiak," Chen said quietly, and the bear's tail actually wagged, something Marcus had never seen before. "It's good to see you again, old friend." The casual familiarity between his bear and this federal agent sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "You know him?" "I know him very well." "Just as I knew your father." Chen's expression softened slightly. "Colonel Sullivan was one of the finest operatives I ever worked with, Marcus, and Kodiak was an essential part of his mission." They'd moved inside to the small apartment above the store, Chen accepting Marcus's offer of coffee but keeping her attention split between him and the windows. Kodiak had settled at Marcus's feet, but his ears remained pricked, alert to every sound from outside. "Your father wasn't just a retired military officer running a gas station," Chen began, her voice carefully measured. "For the past 30 years, this location served as a communication hub for deep cover intelligence operations. The isolation, the location on a major highway, the perfect cover story of a veteran trying to make ends meet. It was brilliant, really." Marcus felt the world tilting around him. "That's impossible. My father was... he was just a soldier." A strict, by-the-book, career military man who couldn't relate to his own children. He was protecting you by keeping his distance, Chen said gently. All of you. The less you knew about his real work, the safer you were. But in his final years, he discovered something that changed everything. Something that put his own family at the center of the very conspiracy he'd been fighting. She pulled out a tablet, swiping to display financial records, shipping manifests, and photographs that made Marcus's blood run cold. His brother Bradford's company logo appeared repeatedly, along with what looked like weapons specifications and bank account numbers in offshore havens. Bradford's defense consulting firm has been selling restricted military technology on the black market for over 5 years, Chen continued. Victoria's international law practice has been laundering the money through art purchases and real estate transactions. Together, they've facilitated arms sales worth over $2 billion. The coffee cup slipped from Marcus's nerveless fingers, but Kodiak was already moving, his massive paw catching it before it could hit the floor. The casual display of reflexes and intelligence that would have seemed impossible for a normal bear now made terrible sense. The weapons they've sold have ended up in the hands of terrorist organizations, insurgent groups, and criminal cartels, Chen said, her voice hardening. Including the components for improvised explosive devices used against American troops in Afghanistan. Marcus felt something cold and vicious unfurl in his chest. Ryan, your friend Ryan Mitchell, Sergeant First Class, killed by an IED outside Kandahar 18 months ago. Yes, Marcus. The forensic analysis traced components from that device back to a shipment your brother facilitated. The room seemed to collapse around him. The guilt he'd carried, the nightmares, the certainty that he should have died instead of Ryan, all of it had been orchestrated by his own family's greed. Marcus doubled over, feeling physically sick, but Kodiak was there immediately, pressing his warm bulk against Marcus's side, grounding him. Your father spent the last 2 years of his life building a case against them, Chen continued, her voice gentler now. He couldn't turn in his own children without ironclad proof. The evidence he gathered is hidden in that journal you found, along with financial records and communication intercepts that could bring down their entire network. Why didn't he turn them in before he died? Because he discovered they were planning to have him killed. The heart attack wasn't natural, Marcus. We believe they poisoned him when they realized how close he was to exposing them. Marcus looked down at Kodiak, understanding flooding through him. That's why he left the bear to me. Not as a companion, as a guardian. Kodiak has been trained to protect this facility and its occupants. Your father spent 4 years working with him, teaching him to recognize threats, to remember faces and patterns, to use his natural intelligence in ways that would seem impossible to anyone who didn't know better. Chen paused, studying Marcus's face. The question now is whether you're willing to finish what your father started. Before Marcus could answer, Kodiak's head snapped toward the window, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The bear moved to the window, standing on his hind legs to peer out through the curtains, then looked back at Marcus with unmistakable urgency. Chen was already on her feet, hand on her weapon. How many vehicles? Marcus joined Kodiak at the window, his heart sinking as he saw 2 black SUVs pulling into the gas station's lot. 3. No, 4 men. Professional looking. Your siblings work fast, Chen muttered, speaking rapidly into her phone. Backup is 20 minutes out. We need to get you and Kodiak to the safe room your father built. What safe room? Chen looked at him in surprise, then at Kodiak, who was already moving toward the back of the apartment with purpose. He'll show you. That key you found. It opens more than just safes. As if understanding her words, Kodiak led them to what Marcus had always thought was a storage closet. But when the bear nosed open the door and padded inside, Marcus saw something that stopped him cold. The back wall wasn't a wall at all. It was painted metal, with a small, complex lock mechanism hidden behind a loose panel. The brass key fit perfectly. The wall slid aside with a whisper of hydraulics, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. Kodiak was already descending, completely familiar with the route, and Marcus could hear the sound of engines shutting off outside. "Your father left you more than evidence," Chen said as they hurried down the stairs. "He left you a fortress. The question is whether you're ready to use it." At the bottom of the stairs, emergency lighting activated automatically, revealing a space that took Marcus's breath away. Computer equipment, communication arrays, weapons lockers, and enough supplies to withstand a siege. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a command center. Kodiak moved to a large red button on the main console and looked back at Marcus expectantly. "Lockdown protocol," Chen explained. "Once you activate it, nothing gets in or out without the right codes. But Marcus, once you push that button, there's no going back. You'll be committed to this fight." Above them, Marcus could hear footsteps on the apartment floor and voices calling his name. His siblings had sent professionals to clean up their father's loose ends, and Marcus was the biggest loose end of all. He looked at Kodiak, who had saved his life in ways both large and small over the past 6 months. He thought of Ryan, whose death now carried a weight of betrayal that threatened to crush him. He thought of his father, who had died protecting a truth that could save countless lives. Marcus pressed the button. The lockdown protocol transformed the gas station above into an impenetrable fortress. Steel barriers slammed down over windows and doors with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Marcus watched the security monitors as the 4 men outside tested every entrance, their professional efficiency confirming Chen's worst fears. These weren't local thugs, but military contractors with serious training. "They'll give up eventually," Chen said, but her voice lacked conviction. This facility was designed to withstand everything short of a direct missile strike. Marcus studied the monitors, recognizing the tactical movements of the men above. "No, they won't. Look at their positioning. They're setting up for a siege, not a quick extraction. My siblings aren't taking any chances this time." Kodiak had settled beside the main computer console, but his attention remained fixed on the security feeds. Every few minutes, the bear would emit a low rumble when one of the mercenaries moved too close to what Marcus was beginning to realize were carefully concealed defensive positions his father had built into the property. Over the next 6 hours, Marcus began to understand the scope of his inheritance. The command center contained 30 years of intelligence gathering with files on arms dealers, corrupt officials, and criminal networks spanning 6 continents. His father hadn't just been watching. He'd been the central hub for tracking international weapons trafficking, with Kodiak serving as an early warning system for visitors who might pose a threat. The bear was trained to read people, Chen explained as they worked through encrypted files. Your father could tell within minutes whether someone was genuine or dangerous based on Kodiak's reactions. Bears have an incredible sense for human emotions and intentions. The first real shock came when Marcus accessed his father's financial records. The $200 million in the safe was only a fraction of the assets Colonel Sullivan had accumulated over 3 decades of intercepting arms money. Hidden accounts, real estate holdings, and investment portfolios totaled nearly $800 million. All of it money taken from weapons dealers and criminal organizations. He was bleeding them dry, Marcus whispered, scrolling through transaction after transaction. Every time they tried to move money, he found a way to siphon off a percentage. Your father called it patriotic taxation, Chen said with a sad smile. He figured if criminals wanted to profit from death, they could at least contribute to something worthwhile. Most of that money has been anonymously donated to veteran support organizations and victims' families over the years. But it was the personal files that hit Marcus hardest. His father had kept detailed records on each of his children, not just their criminal activities, but their psychological profiles, their fears, their motivations. The file on Bradford revealed a man consumed by inadequacy and desperate to prove himself worthy of the Sullivan name. Victoria's profile painted her as a sociopath who saw other people as obstacles to be managed or eliminated. And then there was Marcus's file. Page after page of observations, starting from his childhood and continuing through his military service. His father had tracked every commendation, every struggle, every moment of doubt. But what struck Marcus most were the handwritten notes in the margins, expressions of pride, concern, and love that his father had never been able to voice in person. "He knew about your PTSD before you did," Chen said gently, reading over Marcus's shoulder. He recognized the signs from his own experience. The drinking, the isolation, the survivor's guilt. He'd been through it all himself. One entry, dated just weeks before his father's death, made Marcus's throat tight. "Marcus has the strongest moral compass of all my children. His capacity for empathy, even after everything he's endured, proves he's the only one who can be trusted with this responsibility." Kodiak agrees. "The bear chose Marcus long before I made it official." The siege above continued for 3 days. The mercenaries had brought supplies and were clearly prepared for a long wait. They'd cut power to the building, not knowing about the independent generator system running the bunker. They'd jammed cell phone signals, unaware of the military-grade communication equipment below ground. Every few hours, they would call down through the ventilation system, offering Marcus increasingly generous terms for surrender. During those 3 days, Marcus learned to work with Kodiak in ways that seemed to transcend normal human-animal interaction. The bear could distinguish between different types of approaching vehicles long before they appeared on the security cameras. He could sense when the mercenaries were planning something aggressive, positioning himself at strategic points in the bunker minutes before their movements confirmed his instincts. But it was on the 3rd night that Kodiak demonstrated abilities that truly astounded Marcus. They were reviewing his father's coded communications when Kodiak suddenly rose and moved to a specific filing cabinet. The bear stood on his hind legs and began pawing at a particular drawer with clear intent. When Marcus opened it, he found files he'd missed before, detailed financial records showing his siblings' most recent transactions. "He's trying to tell us something," Chen said, studying the documents. "These are all from the past 2 weeks, right around the time your father died." Marcus spread the papers across the console, and Kodiak immediately nosed 3 specific documents. All 3 showed large money transfers to the same offshore account, totaling nearly $50 million. "Payment for my father's murder," Marcus said, his voice flat. "They hired someone to kill him." Chen was already on her encrypted communication system, relaying the account information to her superiors. "If we can trace these payments, we can prove they orchestrated his death." But Kodiak wasn't finished. The bear moved to another section of files, this time focusing on shipping manifests and delivery schedules. The pattern that emerged made Marcus sick to his stomach. His siblings were planning something massive, a weapons shipment worth over $1 billion scheduled to move through the port of San Francisco in less than a week. This isn't just about covering up their past crimes, Marcus realized. They're accelerating their timeline. They want to make one final huge score before disappearing. The manifest listed the buyer as a shell corporation, but Marcus's military intelligence training helped him recognize the real customer. A terrorist organization that had been responsible for dozens of attacks across 3 continents. The weapons being sold weren't just conventional arms, but components for chemical weapons and vehicle-borne explosive devices. "We have to stop them," Marcus said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew the impossibility of their situation. They were trapped in a bunker, surrounded by mercenaries, with no way to reach the authorities with evidence that could prevent a catastrophic attack. That's when Kodiak did something that changed everything. The bear moved to a section of the command center Marcus hadn't fully explored, revealing equipment that looked like something from a military command post. Communications arrays, satellite uplinks, and what appeared to be a sophisticated hacking setup that his father had used to infiltrate criminal networks. With deliberate purpose, Kodiak began manipulating the controls. His massive paws, seemingly too large for such delicate work, moved across keyboards and switches with surprising precision. Within minutes, screens were activating, showing real-time surveillance feeds from locations across the country. "Your father taught him to operate the communication system," Chen breathed, watching in amazement. "He's accessing the network." The feed showed Marcus something that made his blood run cold. His siblings weren't just planning one weapons sale, they were coordinating simultaneous shipments from 5 different ports, using the chaos of multiple investigations to hide their true objective. The San Francisco shipment was a decoy, designed to draw attention while the real prize moved through Los Angeles. But there was more. As Kodiak continued working the controls with an intelligence that defied explanation, additional feeds revealed the scope of their desperation. Bradford and Victoria had hired mercenary teams to eliminate not just Marcus, but also Agent Chen and any other federal investigators who might have been working with their father. "They're not just trying to silence us," Marcus said, studying the intelligence streaming across multiple screens. "They're preparing to disappear entirely." New identities, offshore accounts, and enough firepower to defend whatever compound they're planning to hide in. Chen was already relaying the information to her headquarters, but Marcus could see the frustration in her face. "Even with this intelligence, we can't coordinate a response from down here. We need to get this information to the task force preparing to intercept the shipments." "No," Marcus said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "We need to get out of here and stop them ourselves." "That's suicide, Marcus. There are 4 trained killers up there, and we have no way out." Marcus looked at Kodiak, who had finished with the communications array and was now watching him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. In that moment, Marcus understood something his father had tried to tell him. Some bonds transcend normal understanding, and some partnerships require complete trust. "Actually," Marcus said, studying the building schematics his father had left in the files, "I think we do have a way out, and I think Kodiak has been waiting for us to figure it out." The bear's tail wagged once, a gesture Marcus had learned meant approval. Above them, the mercenaries continued their patient siege, unaware that their quarry was about to become the hunter. The escape route Kodiak revealed was pure genius. A tunnel system Colonel Sullivan had built that connected the bunker to a camouflaged exit point nearly half a mile away in the dense redwood forest. The bear led them through passages carved directly into the rocky substrate beneath the property, moving with the confidence of someone who had traversed this route many times before. "Your father was more paranoid than I realized," Chen whispered, as they crawled through sections barely wide enough for human passage. Kodiak moved ahead of them with surprising grace for his size, occasionally pausing to ensure they were keeping up. They emerged in a natural depression surrounded by massive redwood trunks, the gas station completely hidden from view. Chen's backup team was waiting. 6 federal agents who looked relieved to see them alive but skeptical about the 400-pound bear that had guided their escape. "Agent Chen," the team leader said, eyeing Kodiak warily, "we have authorization to move on the arms shipments, but we need to address the animal situation first. Fish and Wildlife is demanding immediate custody. That bear just saved our lives and provided intelligence that's going to prevent a terrorist attack," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone, including himself. "He stays with me." Kodiak positioned himself between Marcus and the federal agents, not aggressively but with clear intent. The message was unmistakable. They were partners. The confrontation that followed revealed the true scope of his siblings' desperation. Bradford and Victoria had used their connections to convince multiple federal agencies that Marcus was mentally unstable, that the bear was a public safety threat, and that their father's supposed evidence was the product of paranoid delusions. They'd even provided psychiatric evaluations detailing Marcus's PTSD and drinking history as proof he couldn't be trusted with classified information. They've been planning this character assassination for months, Chen explained as they reviewed the legal challenges. Every agency that might investigate them has been fed stories about your instability and the dangerous animal you're harboring illegally. But Marcus's military training had taught him something his siblings had forgotten. Sometimes the direct approach was the most effective. While the federal agents debated jurisdiction and protocols, Marcus studied the intelligence Kodiak had helped them gather. The pattern was clear. His siblings would be at the port of Los Angeles personally, overseeing their final massive weapons transfer before disappearing forever. "We're going after them ourselves," Marcus announced, causing immediate protest from the federal team. "Absolutely not," the team leader said. "You're a civilian with no authority." "I'm a veteran whose best friend died because of weapons my family sold to terrorists," Marcus cut him off. "And that bear has been trained by a 30-year intelligence operative who knew more about stopping arms dealers than anyone in this room." Chen looked between Marcus and Kodiak, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You're not planning a confrontation, you're planning an intervention." The plan that emerged over the next 6 hours was audacious in its simplicity. Marcus and Kodiak would infiltrate the port using the bear's trained abilities to detect weapons and identify threats. While federal agents coordinated official responses to the other shipments, Marcus would gather real-time intelligence on his siblings' location and plans. "Kodiak can smell explosives from over a quarter-mile away," Marcus explained to the skeptical agents. "He's been trained to identify specific chemical signatures and track them to their source. We don't need warrants or probable cause. We just need to find where they're hiding the weapons." The drive south took 8 hours, during which Marcus found himself forming an unprecedented partnership with the federal team. Agent Chen had vouched for both him and Kodiak, but it was the bear's obvious intelligence and training that gradually won over the other agents. Kodiak demonstrated an ability to identify weapons in passing vehicles, alerting to concealed firearms with subtle but clear signals that Marcus had learned to read. At a rest stop outside Bakersfield, Kodiak's behavior shifted dramatically. The bear became alert and focused, his attention fixed on a specific direction. Marcus followed his gaze to see 2 black SUVs parked at the far end of the lot, their occupants clearly conducting surveillance. "We're being followed," Marcus said quietly into his radio. "Kodiak spotted them before I did." The federal team's response was swift and professional. Within minutes, they'd identified the surveillance team as employees of Bradford's security company, mercenaries who had been tracking Marcus since their escape from the gas station. "Your siblings are getting desperate," Chen observed as they watched the suspects being detained. "They're willing to use their own people to stop us." The port of Los Angeles at night was a maze of containers, cranes, and security lights that created a landscape of deep shadows and harsh illumination. Marcus and Kodiak moved through this industrial labyrinth with growing confidence in their partnership. The bear's senses provided early warning of security patrols, while Marcus's military training helped them navigate the complex security systems. It was Kodiak who led them to the correct warehouse. His behavior changed the moment they approached the massive building. His hackles rose, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Marcus could smell it too now, the distinctive chemical odors that indicated serious weapons storage. Through warehouse windows, they could see the operation in full swing. Dozens of workers were loading shipping containers under the supervision of men in expensive suits. At the center of it all stood Bradford and Victoria, coordinating what appeared to be the largest arms transfer Marcus had ever witnessed. "Jesus," Marcus whispered into his radio. "Chen, you need to see this. They're not just selling weapons, they're distributing them to multiple terrorist cells simultaneously." The intelligence they gathered over the next 2 hours painted a picture of corruption that went far beyond simple arms dealing. Bradford and Victoria had established a network that connected criminal organizations across 3 continents, using their legitimate businesses as fronts for coordinating terrorist attacks, drug trafficking, and human smuggling. But it was what Kodiak discovered in an adjacent warehouse that truly horrified Marcus. The bear had been growing increasingly agitated, and when Marcus followed him into the second building, he understood why. Rows of vehicles had been modified with hidden compartments designed to hold explosive devices. These weren't just weapons for resale, they were components for coordinated terrorist attacks planned for major American cities. "They're planning something for next week," Marcus realized, reading shipping labels that showed delivery dates to locations in New York, Washington, and Los Angeles. This isn't just about making money anymore. They're actively participating in attacks against American civilians. The revelation transformed Marcus's understanding of what they were facing. His siblings weren't just criminals, they were traitors planning mass casualties on American soil. The guilt and anger he'd been carrying about Ryan's death evolved into something colder and more focused, a determination to prevent his family from murdering thousands of innocent people. That's when Bradford spotted them. Marcus heard his brother's voice across the warehouse, shouting orders to security teams. Within seconds, the building erupted in chaos as armed men began searching for intruders. Marcus and Kodiak found themselves trapped between shipping containers, surrounded by mercenaries who had orders to shoot on sight. "Federal agents are moving in," Chen's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Hold your position for backup." But Marcus could see the situation deteriorating rapidly. Workers were fleeing the building, taking with them any evidence of the terrorist plot. Bradford and Victoria were destroying documents and computer drives, eliminating proof of their network's scope and planned attacks. "They're going to escape again," Marcus said, watching his siblings prepare to disappear into the night. "If we wait for backup, they'll vanish and execute their attacks from somewhere else." Kodiak seemed to understand the urgency. The bear moved with sudden purpose, not away from danger, but directly toward it. Marcus followed, trusting his partner's instincts even as gunfire erupted around them. What happened next would be burned into Marcus's memory forever. Kodiak charged directly at Bradford, not to attack, but to herd him away from the escape routes. The bear's size and presence created such panic among the mercenaries that their coordinated response collapsed into chaos. In the confusion, Marcus reached the computer station where Victoria was desperately trying to delete files. For the first time in years, he found himself face to face with his sister, and the cold calculation in her eyes told him everything he needed to know about what she'd become. "Hello, little brother," she said, her voice eerily calm despite the chaos around them. "I was hoping we could resolve this without violence, but you've always been stubborn." The gun in her hand was steady, professional. Marcus realized that his sister had every intention of killing him personally. That's when Kodiak's roar shook the entire warehouse, and Marcus understood that their final confrontation had only just begun. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, but it wasn't Victoria who fired. Bradford had appeared behind Marcus, his weapon trained not on his brother, but on Kodiak. The bear staggered, dark blood spreading across his shoulder, but his eyes remained fixed on Marcus with an intensity that spoke of absolute loyalty even in pain. "Drop your weapon, Tory," Bradford commanded, his voice shaking with an emotion Marcus couldn't identify. "This has gone far enough." Victoria's perfectly composed facade cracked, revealing something wild and desperate underneath. "He's seen everything, Brad. He knows about the attacks, the network, all of it. We can't let him walk away." "Look at him!" Bradford shouted, gesturing at Kodiak, who was struggling to remain standing. "Look what we've become. We're shooting animals and planning to murder our own brother. This isn't what we agreed to." Marcus knelt beside Kodiak, pressing his hands against the wound to stem the bleeding. The bear's breathing was labored, but those intelligent eyes never left Marcus's face. "It's okay, boy," Marcus whispered, though his voice cracked with emotion. "You're going to be okay." "Actually, he's not," Victoria said coldly, raising her weapon again. "And neither are you, Marcus. Some secrets are too big to let walk away." The sound of federal agents breaching the warehouse doors provided a momentary distraction, but Victoria's gun never wavered. In that split second, Marcus saw his entire future balanced on a knife's edge: save himself and let his siblings escape to continue their reign of terror, or protect Kodiak and potentially lose them both. The choice was made for him when Kodiak, despite his wound, lunged forward with a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The bear's massive form collided with Victoria, sending her gun flying across the concrete floor. But the effort cost him. Kodiak collapsed immediately, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Bradford stood frozen, his weapon hanging uselessly at his side as he watched his sister struggle beneath 400 pounds of wounded bear. "Tori, stop fighting him. He's not trying to hurt you." But Victoria was beyond reason. She clawed at Kodiak's face, screaming obscenities and threats until federal agents reached them and carefully extracted her from beneath the bear's protective bulk. Even as they handcuffed her, she continued shouting about dangerous animals and unstable veterans. Marcus cradled Kodiak's massive head in his lap, feeling the bear's life ebbing away with each labored breath. Around them the warehouse buzzed with federal activity, agents photographing evidence, arresting conspirators, and documenting what would become one of the largest terrorism prevention cases in American history. "We need a veterinarian," Marcus called out desperately. "He's bleeding out." "Marcus," Bradford said quietly, approaching with his hands raised and his weapon discarded. "I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry for all of this." For the first time since childhood, Marcus saw genuine emotion in his brother's eyes. Not the cold calculation or desperate ambition, but actual human feeling. "Why, Brad? Why did you do this? Why did you sell weapons to the people who killed Ryan?" Bradford sank to his knees beside them, his expensive suit already stained with Kodiak's blood. "Because I was jealous," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Jealous of you. Jealous of Dad's respect for you. Jealous of the way that bear chose you over everyone else. I wanted to prove I was the successful one, the important one. But every deal I made, every dollar I earned, it all felt hollow because I knew you were the one Dad really respected." Agent Chen arrived with a veterinary emergency team, but Marcus could see in their faces that Kodiak's condition was critical. The bullet had struck near vital organs, and the bear's massive size made surgery complicated under the best circumstances, let alone in a warehouse surrounded by chaos. "We need to move him to a proper facility," the veterinarian said. "But I have to be honest, his chances aren't good. The trauma, the blood loss, the stress of the situation. I'm not sure he's going to make it." Marcus felt something break inside his chest, a pain more acute than any he'd experienced in combat. This bear, who had saved his life in countless ways, both large and small, was dying because of his family's greed and his own need for justice. "There's something else," Bradford said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The attacks Victoria was planning. They're scheduled for tomorrow. Multiple cities, coordinated strikes during rush hour. Even with her arrested, the cells she's been working with might proceed anyway." The federal agents immediately intensified their questioning, but Victoria had remained completely silent since her arrest, offering no information about timing, targets, or the terrorist cells she'd been coordinating with. The computers had been wiped, the documents destroyed, and any hope of preventing the attack seemed to rest with Marcus and the intelligence his father had gathered. That's when Kodiak did something extraordinary. Despite his wounds, despite his obvious pain, the bear struggled to lift his head and look toward a specific shipping container across the warehouse. His breathing was rapid and shallow, but his eyes were focused with an intensity that Marcus had learned to recognize. "He's trying to tell us something," Marcus said, following Kodiak's gaze. "There's something in that container." Against medical advice, Marcus helped carry Kodiak closer to the container the bear had indicated. With each step, Kodiak's agitation increased until he was making soft vocalizations that Marcus had never heard before, urgent, pleading sounds that seemed to be directing their attention to a specific spot. Inside the container, federal agents found what appeared to be a command center for coordinating the planned attacks. Maps of target cities, timing schedules, and communication equipment that was still receiving messages from terrorist cells awaiting final instructions. But it was the laptop computer, still logged into an encrypted communication system, that provided the breakthrough they needed. "We can trace the communications," Chen said, her voice tight with excitement. "Every cell Victoria was coordinating with, every target, every timeline, it's all here." But as the veterinary team prepared to transport Kodiak to an emergency facility, Marcus realized the terrible cost of their victory. The bear who had made it all possible was slipping away, his breathing becoming more labored with each passing minute. "Stay with me, boy," Marcus whispered, his hand resting on Kodiak's massive head. "We did it. We stopped them. Dad would be proud of both of us." For a moment, Kodiak's eyes focused on Marcus with startling clarity, and Marcus could have sworn he saw understanding there. Not just animal recognition, but genuine comprehension of what they had accomplished together. The bear's paw moved slightly, coming to rest against Marcus's hand in what felt unmistakably like a gesture of comfort. Bradford approached them one final time before being led away in handcuffs. "Marcus, I know this doesn't change anything, but he's an extraordinary animal." "I've never seen loyalty like that in my entire life." "He's not just an animal," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "He's family. He's the best of us." As the emergency vehicles prepared to leave, Agent Chen pulled Marcus aside. "The intelligence you and Kodiak provided is going to save thousands of lives. Multiple coordinated attacks across 5 cities, all prevented because of what you uncovered tonight." But Marcus barely heard her. His attention was focused entirely on Kodiak, who was being loaded into a specialized veterinary transport. The bear's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and Marcus could see in the medical team's faces that they weren't optimistic about his chances. "I'm going with him," Marcus said, climbing into the transport vehicle. It wasn't a request. As they raced through the night toward the veterinary hospital, Marcus held Kodiak's paw and made a promise. "Whatever happens, boy, you're going home. Win or lose, we're going home together." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus could feel his world collapsing around him. The bear who had saved his life, who had taught him the meaning of unconditional loyalty, who had been his partner in the most important mission of his life, was slipping away despite everything they had accomplished. The tragedy was complete. They had won the war, but might lose the thing that mattered most. The veterinary hospital's emergency room was a sterile hell of bright lights and desperate activity. Marcus paced the waiting area while surgeons worked to save Kodiak's life, each minute stretching into an eternity of uncertainty. Agent Chen had arrived with updates on the terrorist plot they'd prevented. 17 separate attacks across 5 major cities, potentially thousands of casualties avoided because of the intelligence Kodiak had helped them gather. But Marcus couldn't focus on their victory. All he could think about was the bear who had given everything to protect him and countless strangers he would never meet. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the lead veterinary surgeon, emerged from the operating room after 6 hours with exhaustion written across her face. "He's alive," she said, and Marcus felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "But he's not out of danger. The bullet damaged several organs, and he lost a tremendous amount of blood. The next 24 hours will be critical." Marcus was allowed to sit beside Kodiak's recovery bed, watching the steady rise and fall of the bear's massive chest. Monitors beeped rhythmically, tracking vital signs that fluctuated between stable and concerning. Kodiak's eyes remained closed, but occasionally his paw would twitch as if reaching for something. "Talk to him," Dr. Martinez advised. "Bears are incredibly intelligent, and the bond you two share might be the strongest factor in his recovery." So Marcus talked. He told Kodiak about their father's pride in both of them, about the lives they'd saved, about the future they would build together when he recovered. He read aloud from his father's journal, sharing entries that revealed the deep affection Colonel Sullivan had felt for both his son and the remarkable bear he'd trained. But it was Bradford's visit that provided the most unexpected revelation. His brother arrived at the hospital in shackles, flanked by federal marshals who had agreed to allow a brief visit before Bradford's transport to federal detention. The man who entered Kodiak's room bore little resemblance to the polished executive who had orchestrated international arms deals. Bradford looked hollow, aged by guilt and the weight of his crimes. "I need to tell you something," Bradford said, his voice barely above a whisper, "about why Dad really left Kodiak to you." Marcus looked up from his vigil beside the bear's bed, noting how Bradford kept his distance, still fearful even of an unconscious Kodiak. "When we were kids," Bradford continued, "before Mom died, Dad used to take us camping in the redwoods. I was 8, you were 5. We encountered a mother bear with cubs, and I panicked, started running and screaming. The bear perceived me as a threat and charged." Marcus had no memory of this incident, but something in Bradford's voice suggested this was a story that had shaped his entire life. Dad had to choose in that split second: protect me from the bear or protect the bear from the rangers who would have hunted her down after attacking a child. He chose me, obviously, shot the mother bear to save my life. But I saw something in his eyes afterward, a disappointment that I was too young to understand then. Bradford's hands shook as he continued. "Years later, when Dad started training Kodiak, I realized what that look had been. He was disappointed that I had chosen fear over understanding, violence over coexistence. Kodiak represented everything Dad believed about the possibility of harmony between humans and wild things." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His brother's entire adult life had been shaped by a childhood moment where he'd felt judged and found wanting. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of his respect," Bradford said, tears streaming down his face. "But every success felt hollow because I knew he saw Kodiak as the son who understood what really mattered. The bear wasn't just your companion, Marcus. He was Dad's way of saying you were the child who could love without conditions." That night, as Marcus maintained his vigil, Kodiak's condition took a dramatic turn for the worse. His breathing became labored, his heart rate erratic. Dr. Martinez worked frantically to stabilize him, but Marcus could see the growing concern in her eyes. "We're losing him," she said finally. "His body is shutting down. The trauma was just too severe." Marcus felt his world collapsing. He pressed his face against Kodiak's massive head, whispering the words he'd never been able to say to anyone else. "I love you, boy. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. Please don't leave me." But even as he spoke, Marcus could feel Kodiak slipping away. The bear's breathing became more shallow, his heartbeat irregular. The monitors began sounding alarms as his vital signs deteriorated beyond the point of medical intervention. That's when Agent Chen arrived with news that changed everything. "Marcus, you need to know something," she said urgently. We've been investigating your father's death more thoroughly. The toxicology reports came back. He was poisoned just as we suspected. But we also found something else. She handed him a sealed letter addressed in his father's handwriting. He left this with his lawyer, with instructions to deliver it only if something happened to both him and Kodiak. With trembling hands, Marcus opened the letter as Kodiak's life hung in the balance. My dear son, if you are reading this, then both Kodiak and I are gone, and you are facing the darkest moment of your life. I need you to know that everything, the inheritance, the mission, the bear himself, was designed to give you something I failed to provide while I was alive. The knowledge that you are loved unconditionally and trusted completely. Kodiak was never just my asset or your companion. He was my way of teaching you the lesson I learned too late. That love doesn't diminish when shared, it multiplies. That bear chose you the day I brought him home, just as I chose you to carry on the work that matters most. You have already proven yourself worthy of that trust. By the time you read this, you will have saved countless lives and stopped a conspiracy that threatened our nation's security. More importantly, you will have learned that true strength comes not from standing alone, but from accepting the love and loyalty of those who see your worth even when you cannot. If Kodiak is dying as you read this, know that his sacrifice was not in vain. He lived to protect you just as you lived to protect others. That is the legacy I wanted for both my sons, the bear who walks on 4 legs and the man who walks on 2. But Marcus, if there is any chance to save him, fight for it. Fight with everything you have, because some bonds are too precious to surrender to fate. Your proud father, Colonel William Sullivan, P.S. Check the safety deposit box at First National Bank in Ferndale. The key is in Kodiak's collar. What you find there will ensure that your fight to save lives can continue forever. Marcus looked up from the letter to see Dr. Martinez preparing to turn off Kodiak's life support. Wait, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. There's one more thing we can try. He pulled out his phone and called the number Agent Chen had given him for emergencies, a direct line to the Pentagon. When the duty officer answered, Marcus identified himself and made a request that would have seemed insane just days earlier. This is Marcus Sullivan, the civilian operative who provided intelligence on the terrorism plot. I need emergency authorization for an experimental veterinary procedure that's only available at UC Davis. The animal who made our mission possible is dying, and I'm requesting federal intervention to save his life. What followed was a series of phone calls that escalated through multiple levels of government. Within 2 hours, a military transport helicopter was landing at the hospital to transfer Kodiak to the University of California's cutting-edge veterinary facility, where experimental surgery techniques might provide his only chance for survival. As they loaded Kodiak's unconscious form into the helicopter, Marcus realized that the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. His father's letter had promised resources that could fund their mission indefinitely, and there were countless veterans like himself who needed the kind of healing that only unconditional love could provide. But first, they had to save the bear who had started it all. Flying through the night toward what might be Kodiak's last chance, Marcus held his partner's paw and made a promise that would define the rest of his life. If Kodiak survived, they would spend their remaining years together saving others who needed second chances. The revolution was about to begin, but it would be built on love, not vengeance, exactly as his father had planned. 5 years later, Marcus stood on the wraparound porch of the Sullivan Wildlife Sanctuary, watching the morning sun filter through the ancient redwoods that had become home to over 300 rescued animals and the veterans who cared for them. The transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. What had once been a failing gas station was now a thriving community dedicated to healing both human and animal souls. Kodiak emerged from the main lodge, moving with the careful dignity of a 9-year-old bear whose body bore the scars of that terrible night in Los Angeles. The experimental surgery at UC Davis had saved his life, though he would always carry a slight limp and tire more easily than before. But his intelligence remained as sharp as ever, and his bond with Marcus had only deepened through their shared recovery. "Morning, old friend," Marcus said, scratching behind Kodiak's ears in the spot that never failed to make the massive bear's eyes close in contentment. "Ready for another day of changing lives?" The sanctuary had grown beyond anything Marcus could have imagined when he'd first opened his father's safety deposit box and discovered the true extent of Colonel Sullivan's legacy. $800 million in carefully invested assets, along with detailed plans for exactly the kind of facility Marcus was now operating. His father had spent decades preparing for this moment, knowing that his youngest son would eventually find his true calling in healing others. Dr. Sarah Chen, now Dr. Sarah Sullivan after their marriage 2 years earlier, approached from the veterinary clinic, her face glowing with the kind of happiness Marcus had never thought possible for himself. She'd left the intelligence agency to become the sanctuary's head veterinarian, finding more fulfillment in saving animal lives than she'd ever found in government service. "The new group arrives in an hour," she said, reviewing her tablet. 12 veterans, ranging from recent discharge to 10 years post-service, all dealing with various forms of trauma, all paired with rescue animals based on Kodiak's assessment protocols. Marcus smiled at the mention of Kodiak's role in their intake process. The bear had demonstrated an uncanny ability to match veterans with the animals who could best help them heal. His success rate was over 90%, a statistic that had drawn attention from military medical facilities across the country and made the Sullivan method the gold standard for animal-assisted therapy. The sound of children's laughter drew their attention to the playground area, where a group of kids were being supervised by their fathers, all veterans in various stages of recovery. Marcus had expanded the sanctuary's mission to include family healing, recognizing that trauma affected entire households, not just the service members who carried it home. Among the children was 8-year-old Miguel, whose father, Roberto, had arrived at the sanctuary 3 years earlier as a broken Marine who hadn't spoken to his family in months. Roberto's breakthrough had come through his partnership with Luna, a rescued wolf-dog hybrid who had been deemed unadoptable by conventional shelters. Now Roberto served as the sanctuary's head groundskeeper, and Miguel spent every weekend helping care for the animals who had given his father back his voice. "Uncle Marcus!" Miguel called out, running toward them with Luna padding gracefully beside him. "Kodiak promised to teach me how to fish today." Marcus exchanged an amused look with Sarah. Over the years, Kodiak had indeed developed his own methods of teaching the sanctuary children various skills, always with perfect safety and seemingly infinite patience. The bear's gentle nature with young humans had become legendary, and pediatric psychologists regularly referred traumatized children to the sanctuary specifically for Kodiak's unique form of therapy. The morning's new arrivals included Jennifer Walsh, a Navy helicopter pilot whose aircraft had been shot down in Syria, leaving her with severe PTSD and a phobia of confined spaces. Marcus watched as Kodiak approached her with characteristic patience, not forcing interaction but simply making himself available. Within minutes, Jennifer was tentatively stroking the bear's massive head, tears streaming down her face. "How does he do that?" she whispered to Marcus. "I haven't been able to touch another living thing without panic attacks for 8 months." "He sees what we need before we know it ourselves," Marcus replied, remembering his own first encounter with Kodiak's healing presence. "Bears are incredibly empathetic creatures. Kodiak just happens to be exceptionally gifted at reading human emotions." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Bradford Sullivan, now in his 3rd year of a supervised release program that allowed him to work at the sanctuary under federal monitoring. His transformation had been as dramatic as Marcus's own journey from broken veteran to sanctuary director. The man who had once orchestrated international arms deals now spent his days maintaining hiking trails and helping with animal care, finding peace in the simple work of nurturing rather than destroying. "Marcus," Bradford said quietly, approaching as Marcus finished settling Jennifer with her assigned therapy partner, a gentle retired police dog named Shadow. Agent Chen called. Victoria's parole hearing was denied again. Marcus nodded, feeling a familiar mixture of sadness and relief. Victoria had remained unrepentant throughout her incarceration, showing no remorse for the terrorist attacks she'd helped plan or the lives lost to weapons she'd trafficked. Unlike Bradford, who had found genuine redemption through years of therapy and service, Victoria seemed incapable of acknowledging the humanity of her victims. The families of the victims testified against her release, Bradford continued, his voice heavy with guilt that would probably never fully fade. They're right to keep her locked up. Some of us can be saved, but others— He trailed off, watching Kodiak gently guide a traumatized veteran toward a group therapy session led by one of the sanctuary's counselors. That evening, as the sun set through the redwood canopy, Marcus found himself in the memorial garden he'd created to honor the victims of his siblings' crimes. Ryan Mitchell's name was engraved on the central stone, along with the names of every person killed by weapons Bradford and Victoria had trafficked. It was a stark reminder of the cost of their family's greed, but also a testament to the lives saved by the sanctuary's work. Kodiak settled beside him with a contented sigh, the bear's presence as comforting now as it had been during those first dark months after his father's death. Around them the sanctuary buzzed with quiet activity. Veterans participating in evening therapy sessions, children helping with animal feeding, staff members preparing for the next day's healing work. Sarah joined them, carrying their 6-month-old daughter Emma, who reached immediately for Kodiak with the fearless affection that only children possess. The bear gently nuzzled the baby's tiny hand, his massive size making her look impossibly fragile and precious. "She's going to grow up thinking it's perfectly normal to have a 400-pound bear as an uncle," Sarah laughed, watching Emma giggle at Kodiak's gentle attention. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Marcus replied, thinking of all the supposedly normal relationships he'd witnessed that were built on conditions, expectations, and limitations. "She'll understand from the beginning that love comes in all shapes and sizes." As night settled over the sanctuary, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The broken veteran who had inherited a failing gas station and a dangerous animal had become the director of the most successful animal therapy program in the country. The bear who had been seen as a liability had proven to be the most valuable asset in healing human hearts. But more than professional success, Marcus had found something he'd never expected, a family built not on blood or obligation, but on choice, service, and unconditional love. Kodiak had taught him that the strongest bonds weren't created by genetics or legal documents, but by the daily decision to show up for each other, no matter what. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new veterans seeking healing, new animals needing homes. But tonight, surrounded by the family he'd chosen and the family who had chosen him, Marcus Sullivan had everything he'd ever truly needed. The circle was complete, and the healing would continue for generations to come. Dear friends, as we reach the golden years of our lives, many of us carry burdens we never expected, the weight of family disappointments, the ache of feeling unappreciated, the fear that our best years are behind us. Marcus Sullivan's story reminds us that sometimes our greatest trials become our most profound blessings. At 34, broken by war and rejected by his own family, Marcus thought his life was over. But through the unconditional love of an extraordinary bear named Kodiak, he discovered that family isn't about blood. It's about who stays when life gets tough, who sees our worth when we can't see it ourselves. Today, thousands of veterans and their families find healing at the Sullivan Wildlife Sanctuary, proving that it's never too late for second chances, never too late to build the family you always deserved. Mark has learned what many of us discover in our later years, that the deepest joy comes not from being perfect, but from being perfectly loved, flaws and all. Sometimes the most unexpected relationships, whether with a rescue animal, a neighbor in need, or a veteran struggling to find his way, become the very bonds that give our lives meaning. What unexpected relationship has brought the most joy to your life? Have you ever experienced unconditional love from an animal companion? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.